The .NET 8 Identity Endpoints. I have upheld my promise of delivering an end-to-end authentication module, a working solution from front-end components using these identity endpoints and database identity tables. I cannot recommend using these identity endpoints in your projects as they are still in an early stage, and we'd better wait until release candidate 2. For bug fixes and more flexibility. I'm currently working with release candidate 1, so by the time you see this video, these issues might be resolved. So let's take a look at the Swagger. Let's first note at the top, there's this authorize button, where you can enter the bearer token once you authenticate it. So that would be the access token. To authenticate, you'll need an email and a password, and of course that user needs to be registered. So you can do that at the register endpoint. You'll also see the Swagger documentation, which is nice. And this bad request is just, there is some exception handling in place, so that's also very nice. And then where the trouble starts is with these email endpoints. They have implemented most of this up until sending the actual email, so that's where we have to take over the work, which is fine, but as of now it still contains some bugs and it's not really flexible. We'll talk more about that in a bit. So let's try the authentication flow with the out-of-the-box identity endpoints from .NET 8. So I have registered. I did add some code in to send to my actual email address, so don't worry about that. And then we get this nice, please confirm your account by clicking here. And then we should go to a confirmation page, which I made in the front end. If you look at the URL, confirm email / and then we have the user ID followed by the code, confirmation code coming from identity. So I registered and I already confirmed my account. So let's try the login, which will use the same fields. And we get this nice response with an access token, a bearer token, an expiration of I think 60 minutes and a refresh token to refresh that access token once this token expired. So now I copied that access token and I'm going to authorize the Swagger. So I'm just pasting the access token in here, press authorize, and now I should be able to get my user info. So that is auth manage info, which will give me test@gmail.com, email confirmed true, and all my claims. So name identifier is the user ID, name, which would be probably the username and the table, and the email address, and some more stuff, the method I authenticated. So we saw that everything worked, so I registered a new user, I authenticated, well, I got an email to confirm my account as well. We authenticated and I was able to access my protected information. So let's try the same thing in the front end. Test@gmail.com. This should usually be a real email address, of course, to receive that email, but I hacked around it. Test 1, 2, 3, 4. I added this toggle to display the password. Login and will be redirected to a protected page showing us the email address, and then is email confirmed, and the claims you saw before, and a form to update the password if we need to do that. And I also added in the reset password and all the pages needed to confirm and so on. Let's look at that confirm screen one more time. So confirmation message. Let's say that failed. Then we can go to the resend confirmation email form and resend it. That's sweet. And the good thing to know is that the team is aware of the issues, the bugs, and they are also working on making things more flexible. So let's now dive into the code. The DbContext this time, now from identity DbContext, and we pass along. So let's take a look at that user model, inherits from identity user. I added a nullable name, so I actually wanted a user to register his or her account and add in their first name or last name, but not that flexible, so we cannot unfortunately add these fields to the registration endpoint. So like you see in the register, can only add in the email and the password, and it wouldn't do anything if I added the name on top. We could ask the user, can you please complete your user information, but then we'd have to make an extra custom endpoint ourselves to update the data the user passed through our form. And then I added, as usual, the metadata fields, because it's always nice to know when the user signed up, which is currently missing from the default identity setup. And the migrations are there to add all of those identity tables to your database. Let's take a look at the API. There's a lot here. To add these identity endpoints, we just do services add identity endpoints, pass along that user model, and I added some identity options, customized, and then add entity framework stores with the authentication DbContext. Then I bound some custom configuration stuff. This is also custom. This has nothing to do with the out-of-the-box thing. This has something to do with the out-of-the-box identity endpoints, which is that the sending of emails. So identity provides an email sender interface, so we can make the actual implementation on that. You can take a look at it. So they provide this method, send email async. When they have registered the user, then finally they prepare this HTML message, which would contain a link to confirm the account. A subject, they provided an email address from the person that signed up. Okay, but then we need to make it work. So we need to provide our own implementation that uses that send async. So we'll take a look at that. And to make that work, I added an SMTP mailer. So that will actually send the emails from a configured email address. Then down below you see the map auth endpoints, and this map identity API will make sure to add all of these identity endpoints of .NET 8. You can configure these identity options, so we just simply pass that along to the add identity API endpoints, add identity options, this extension method, which will allow us to override the password options. I am requiring a unique email, and I am requiring the user to be confirmed. before they can log in. And then the add auth options, this is for the Swagger. So to add that authorize button at the top. But let's take a look at the email sender and the SMTP mailer to actually send the email. So this is what the method we're getting: the email, the subject, the HTML message containing normally a link. So the send async is nothing fancy, it's just an SMTP mailer. I'm composing the email below, and then we just connect the SMTP client, send the email, authenticate and send the email back to the identity email sender. So this inherited from this email sender, which comes from the identity UI services. And then should we take a look at the messy code I wrote to get around these issues? Let's first take a look at what we're receiving in this HTML message. So taking a look at this. So this is a new proposal for the new identity endpoint. But basically what we're receiving now is when I register a user, I get that confirmation email. And what it currently contains is a message. So this is the subject, confirm your email, and then the message, confirm your account by, and then they give us a link, which is decent. Only problem with this link is they introduced a little bug where it just holds it doesn't hold the entire URL of my backend. So it's just gonna give me /auth/confirm email and then with the code, which is not that useful since I cannot, if the user then gets the email, clicks on that and goes nowhere, goes to a broken link. So I added some code, some bad code too. So this is basically what we're getting. I also added should be resolved in release candidate 2. Confirmation email contains so the message of course, and then a link, so an HTML link tag. And then it just says http://auth confirm email and then the user ID and the code. Target blank, clicking here. So if the user clicks this, that's going to be a broken link. So we have to find a way to fix it. And also this is pointing to my backend, which I don't really like. Why would I lead the users to my API? It does work, however, if they land, if I manipulate this link and they land on my API by using that link, then the API will say, thank you for confirming your email, but it will just be an unformatted page. So that's not great. So I rather manipulate this link to go to my frontend where I can have a nice landing page, do everything that's necessary, redirect a user to the index page and so on. So then the forgot password email. I find this completely ridiculous. They didn't even follow the same approach. They then just send an email to the user, reset your password using the following code as plain text, and then the code. So they expect the user, so it could be my mom or my grandma, to go to their email, copy over that link, and then what? Paste it in my API, paste it in a field in my front end. Probably something like that. Which is not useful at all. I rather had them include a link like that I could at least grab the code from the query parameters and then either in the front end or the back end do whatever was needed, which I kind of did, but I had to manipulate this text to get the code out and etc. So that's what this messy code does. So if there is a link, so for some mails it will contain a link, and then for this one forgot password it won't contain a link. So I had to catch both scenarios. If there is a link, we're basically manipulating the link to go to the front end. So what you saw in the start of the video, that would more look like without the authentication thing, confirm email and then /user ID /the code. And if it doesn't contain that link, we'll have to basically construct the front-end link ourselves. So I'm basically reformatting the message and the link. So the reset password would then go to my front-end URL /reset-password /the code and maybe also the email. And this front-end URL, of course, I had to set this in the identity config. This one can go. So I add reset password frontend URL and confirm email frontend URL, which should then be set in the implementation project. I added those to the development settings because for production these won't be the localhost ones, of course. Let's see. So /reset password /confirm email. So that's all this identity config provides. So that's what I mean with it's not really customizable. It would have been nice to, so that I can decide whether the user is sent to my backend or to my front end. And then lastly about that, I wanted to give you fluent email, since that has a lot of options and all of that. So fluent email, you could configure the SMTP, but you could also use SendGrid, Mailgun, or whatever you want, and it's fairly easy to use. However, I had an issue with the dependency injection. They want this fluent email to be used as scoped, and the identity, the identity email sender only wants to be either singleton or transient. So what I could have done is go in here, use the service provider, create a scope, get that fluent email from the service provider, attempt to send an email then, but that just got stuck each time I tried it. It didn't really send the email, it just got stuck and eventually it errored. So that's why I added this SMTP mailer. Feel free to add in SendGrid or Mailgun or whatever you prefer. So I think I covered everything for the API project. The SMTP config is, of course, you need to add this to your app settings. You will need credentials of your SMTP configuration. So what's next? I added also a shared project which just contains some data transfer objects, some DTOs, and the API routes. So these are just the endpoints you saw in the Swagger that I can then use in the front end as well. This one is a bit different. I saw the development team use DTOs internally, but I'm not sure if I can access those, so I made my own. Also, if you make your own, you can customize it a little bit more, and I added my own validators on there as well, and these are mainly for the front-end forms. So the Fluent validation will kick in if I enter malformed information into the form fields in the front end. So then in the front end, I repeated most of the folders, but in here they will hold the forms. Simple form, forgot password, so it's just gonna ask for an email address and a send button. So it has the validation in there. Simple stuff like we usually do the forms, recover password, which is gonna do the HTTP call. Most of the forms are the same, and you saw it in action on the front end at the start of the video. Then let's have a look at the authentication state, which just has one field, user email to confirm, just in case the user wants to resend the confirmation email. Let's have a look at the extension. So I'm just registering the auth state and the client, HTTP client, and I added the usual query string formatter to the extensions method. And then where the actual interesting stuff happens is in the HTTP client. And you see that local storage again. I went over that pretty quickly last time, but that's basically from the NuGet package Blazor local storage, or Blazor Red local storage. It's a pretty good package to add things to the local storage or retrieve things from the local storage. Register user, simple, post to that endpoint, identity endpoint. Has no response, like just a success code. Then logging in gets a bit more tricky. So if it's not successful, yeah, whatever. Then we want to read the login response, since that contains the access token and the refresh token. And if that was all successful, I'm going to save that login response, so all of these tokens, into the local storage. So when the user then closes the browser and revisits the application, the tokens are still there to try to authenticate with, if they're still valid, of course. If they're not still not valid anymore, we should refresh the tokens then. And then I set the HTTP client authentication header with that access token, so that bearer token, which is not a JSON web token. Recover password, which is the forgot password, simple post, reset password, simple post. Confirm email. So that's a get without a response. Resend confirmation email. And then get user info. So once the user is authenticated, we should have an authenticated HTTP client and we can get that user info. And then as well as update the user info. User info response has an email, is email confirmed, and then those claims as a dictionary. So that's the screen when I log in. So I get the information of the user and the claims, and I can update the password. And if I go to look at the local storage, the tokens are there. So the access token, the refresh token. What I didn't do yet is, let's say I refresh. Also, you see at the top, these buttons don't know we are authenticated at this time. If I refresh, I'm not authenticated anymore. But we have everything in place to do that. So all we need to do is read out the local storage, get the tokens, try to get the user info. And depending on whether that was successful, we actually know we're authenticated or not. But I'm going to leave that for the next video, because that I'll have to make some technical decisions whether to go with the out-of-the-box Blazor cascading authentication state provider boilerplate or whether we're going to take a simpler custom approach. So conclusion, I made everything work, but I would not recommend it since we're still a bit early. But I'm sure that the next releases will improve a lot. And maybe then it's a more viable solution. I also think that we'll have to make some more custom endpoints and flows to compensate for the lack of flexibility that the endpoints provide right now. In next video, I'm going to add these finishing touches to keep a user logged in over multiple web app visits. I have already made a video about that. I think it's a custom authorization authentication video I released a few months ago, or maybe even a year ago. But all of that is for next video, and I'm going to try to add at least one identity role, so the administrator, to protect an endpoint to create my own blog posts, which will be necessary before I put this application online. I will publish this code to Patreon, so make sure to check that out. If this video was valuable to you, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe to follow the next episodes. I hope I see you there.